Think back to your own childhood. How many times did you hear the words, "good job"? After a drawing? After a test score? After tying your shoes? After eating your dinner? After doing something that cost you nothing, that you were going to do anyway, that required no particular effort from you at all? Good job. Well done. You're so smart. You're so talented. You're amazing. It sounds like encouragement. It feels like love. Parents mean it as support, as a way of building the child's confidence, of communicating pride and warmth. The motivation behind it is entirely good. The research on what it actually produces is not. Carol Dweck is a psychologist at Stanford University who has spent more than 4 decades studying one specific question: what kinds of beliefs about ability and intelligence lead to better outcomes, and where do those beliefs come from? Her research spans dozens of studies, thousands of children, multiple countries, and it converges on a finding that is simultaneously simple and deeply counterintuitive. Children who are frequently praised for being smart, talented, or naturally gifted become worse at the things we're trying to help them with. They become more anxious when challenged, more likely to give up when something is difficult, more likely to choose easier tasks over harder ones, more likely to lie about their performance to maintain the image of being smart, more fragile, not more confident, in the face of difficulty. The praise, designed to build them up, builds something brittle instead. Dweck named the pattern the fixed mindset, the belief installed by years of attribute praise that ability is a thing you have or don't, that being smart or talented is an identity, not a process. And an identity, by its nature, needs to be protected. You don't take risks when you might look not smart. You don't persist through failure when failure threatens who you are. You don't ask for help when needing help contradicts the story of being naturally gifted. The brilliant but fragile child that Western parents so often produce is not a mystery. It is the predictable output of a specific kind of praise applied consistently across childhood. Japanese parents, without knowing Dweck's research, without any of the academic framework behind it, have largely avoided this pattern for generations. Not because they're withholding or cold, not because they don't express love and pride, but because the cultural understanding of child development in Japan is organized around something entirely different from the Western concept of innate talent. The Japanese concept is gambaru. Gambaru means to persist, to endure, to push forward through difficulty. It carries connotations of effort, of determination, of the specific kind of pride that comes from having kept going when stopping would have been easier. It is, in Japanese cultural life, one of the most admired qualities a person can demonstrate. Not genius, not talent, gambaru. And when Japanese parents notice and respond to their children's behavior, it is gambaru that gets their attention. Not the outcome, not the result, not the evidence of natural ability, but the effort, the persistence, the moments when the child chose to keep going. Not "you're so smart," but "you kept working even when it got hard." Not "you're so talented," but "I saw you try a different way when the first one didn't work." Not "good job," but "what was the hardest part of that for you?" The difference between these two types of response seems subtle in any single interaction. Across a childhood, it produces fundamentally different psychology. Dweck's most well-known study illustrates the mechanism clearly. 2 groups of children were given the same moderately challenging puzzle. After completing it, one group was told, "You're so smart." The other group was told, "You worked really hard at that." Then both groups were given a choice. They could try a harder puzzle or an easier one. 90% of the effort praised children chose the harder puzzle. The majority of the "you're so smart" group chose the easy one. One sentence of praise, and already the children who received attribute praise were protecting an identity, avoiding situations where they might look less than smart, while the children who received effort praise were seeking challenge. Not because they had more ability, not because they were better children, because the praise they had received told them something different about what they were being recognized for. Over time, this divergence compounds. The effort-praised child accumulates experience with difficulty. They build a relationship with challenge that involves persistence, problem-solving, and recovery from failure. They develop what Dweck calls a growth mindset, the understanding that ability is not fixed but expands through effort. That failure is information, not identity. That the hard thing is worth attempting because the hard thing is where growth happens. The attribute praised child accumulates something different, a fragile self-concept that requires constant protection, a relationship with difficulty that is, at its core, about risk management, minimizing exposure to anything that might reveal the limits of the smart or talented label. Japanese classrooms reinforce the Gambaru orientation at the institutional level. Students are almost never singled out for exceptional performance in front of their peers. The hierarchy it creates runs contrary to the cultural value of group cohesion. What receives acknowledgement is contribution, effort, and persistence through a hard problem. Academic ability is treated not as something you're born with, but as something that develops through work. The class works together on a problem until the class gets it, not until the fast students get it and the slow students feel the gap. This has consequences that the PISA scores partially capture but don't fully convey. Japanese students don't just perform well on international educational assessments. They report consistently higher identification with learning as an intrinsically valuable process, as something worth doing for its own sake, not just for the outcome. That orientation, established in childhood, persists into adult professional life in ways that help explain why Japanese craftspeople, engineers, and professionals in dozens of fields demonstrate the kind of sustained mastery that is extremely rare in Western contexts. The shokunin spirit, the dedication to mastering one's craft to the highest possible degree, for its own sake, is not an elite phenomenon in Japan. It is a relatively common expression of a value that was planted in childhood, watered by the praise of effort rather than talent, and cultivated through every school year that reinforced Gambaru over natural ability. If there's one practical shift that the research most unambiguously supports, it's this: move your praise from what your child is to what your child did. This doesn't mean you never express pride. It doesn't mean you withhold warmth or affirmation. It means that when your child does something noteworthy, what you reflect back to them is the process, not the attribute. Instead of "you're so smart," try "you figured that out." Not because you're playing a linguistic game, but because you figured that out is true and specific and process-oriented in a way that "you're so smart" is not. It points the child's attention toward what they actually did, the thinking, the trying, the problem-solving, rather than toward a fixed characteristic they now have to maintain. Instead of "you're so creative," try "I can see how much thought you put into that." Instead of "you're so talented at drawing," try "you've been drawing for a quite long time and it shows." And the most powerful form, the question. What was the hardest part of that for you? This question does something none of the praise statements do. It directs the child's attention inward toward their own experience of effort and challenge. It communicates that the difficulty was noticed and valued. It treats the hard part as interesting rather than as something to be glossed over or minimized. And it builds, slowly and reliably, a relationship between the child and the experience of challenge that will serve them for the rest of their life. Japanese parents have been having some version of this conversation with their children for generations, not because they read the research, because the culture's relationship with effort and mastery produced, over time, a way of responding to children that happened to encode exactly what the developmental science would later confirm. The word they didn't say was "good job." What they said instead built something better.